So Chelsea have just appointed Graham Potter as their manager. It's a massive call on their part because Graham Potter just doesn't have any experience at the really elite level. So the big question is, will Graham Potter work at Chelsea? So before we start looking at what Potter will do at Chelsea, it's important to have some background. On the board in front of me, I'm lucky enough to have got hold of the curriculum vitae of Graham Potter. This is, I think, the CV that he sent in for the job at Chelsea. So let's just take a little bit of a look at his background. And there's a few interesting things to note here. First of all, it's important to note that he's only been the manager, full manager of 3 clubs here in professional football. First one is Östersunds FK. Östersund in Sweden, so he starts out in Sweden, then he moves to Swansea City and then Brighton, and from there obviously to Chelsea. So really doesn't have a huge amount of experience in full club management. Now if we go back in time, there's a few other things that stand out to me. So he retires as a professional footballer in 2005 and at that time does a social science degree at the Open University. And then later on when he's working at Leeds Met University, he actually spends some time doing a master's in emotional intelligence. So very different sort of profile to a lot of football managers there, and obviously has the experience of working on that more psychological side too. Let's just run through some of the other things he does. So he starts off working, especially in university. So he has a football development role at the University of Hull. He's the technical director of the Ghana women's national team. Again, something left field in many respects. He's the assistant coach for the England universities as well, and then works as the assistant coach at Leeds Met University, and then makes that step into full management. So this CV is very unusual, and Graham Potter, I think, is in many respects a very unusual manager. But let's focus on his time at Brighton and have a look at how he changed that club and how he got to a position where Chelsea are now willing to offer him the job. So on the board in front of me, thanks to Mark Carey of The Athletic, who has just written an excellent piece looking at this very topic, so do check that out on The Athletic. This is just a graph which shows you the SBI ratings for Brighton on the 538 website. Now, 538 is a website that runs predictions, and the SBI rating that they use is just a way of monitoring team strength, so that when they're doing their predictive work, they can have some sense of which teams are better than others. And as you can see, in 2018-19, this is around when Chris Hughton is still the manager. You can see there is improvement when Hughton is there, but we get to this point here, which is where Graham Potter takes over, and from that point onwards, the SBI rating pushes up from around the mid-60s all the way up to the high 70s, mid-70s under Potter. So it's clear that he takes the club that are a mid-table side and pushes them up to the next level. Now, 538's SPI ratings may seem a little bit esoteric, so let's have a look at some of the hard data. So again, on the board in front of me, I've got a 10-game rolling average, so we can have a look at the expected goals for and the expected goals against for Brighton over the last few seasons. And again, this gives you a good indication of when teams are doing well in terms of the attacking side of the game and doing well in terms of the defending side of the games. So if we look at Chris Hughton's last season as the Brighton manager, we can see things are not good. So the red line here is expected goals against, so oppositions are creating much better chances than Brighton are. That's the blue line here. Things cannot continue in that way, because if the opposition are creating better chances than you are, in the long run, you're going to lose. So we bring in Graham Potter at this point, just in the 2019-20 season, and you can see already these trend lines starting to change. So the blue line is going up, so Brighton are starting to create better chances, and more importantly, that red line is coming down, so oppositions are not generating as much chances. And into the following season, then after lockdown, we see this real shift in terms of what is happening on the field for Brighton. So oppositions much less likely to generate good chances against Brighton, but Brighton themselves pushing up the quality and the amount of their chances. So you can see that trend line here. Now, last season, this is an interesting one, because as we can see, both of these trend lines are then heading up. So on the one hand, it's good, you're generating more and better chances yourself, but you can see that red trend line here is just in advance of the blue trend line. So things aren't quite right. The expected goals against are not in a good position. The weird thing is that last season was the season when Graham Potter got a 9th place finish. This season, where the numbers look really great, was actually a 16th place finish. So you can see the impact that actually results not trending against your actual performances can give you a very different idea of how well a season has gone. But then that brings us to the current season, 22-23, and as you can see, this, although it's a small sample size at this point, shows you why it is that Chelsea have gone after Potter, because his team now, the expected goals for, much in advance of the expected goals against. Now, there are people questioning whether or not Graham Potter is as good as a lot of people are saying he is, and there's been a lot of things floating around on social media saying that Brighton have only ever got single-figure wins at home in the last few seasons. But I think what's really important to note from Graham Potter isn't just the results and the underlying numbers, but also the way that he's changed Brighton from being a lower table relegation candidate in terms of their play style now to being a very solid mid-table side. And to show that, I've got more viz from The Athletic. This is from John Muller in his play style chart. So we've got 5 seasons here, and the first 2 seasons are the last 2 seasons under Chris Hughton. And as you can see, there's really not much population in either of these 2 radars. You can see lots of switches of play, lots of set pieces. So this is a team who are sitting deep. So you can see low defense, sitting deep, trying to hit on the break, trying to get set pieces and win in that way. And within 3 seasons of Graham Potter, you can see that that play style radar has just become slowly more and more populated in lots of different ways. So the red side here, this is just about pressing. So out of possession, you can see that Brighton are looking really great now. In terms of their defence, they've solided up their defence really impressively too. And then here we've got build-up play, so his teams can build up, progressive play, so his teams can then move from that first phase into a second phase and get the ball into the final third, and that is all really important for a club who wants to do well in the Premier League. Now, the one area to point out actually is this area here. So in the middle of the yellow area, we have chance creation, and this is an area where Potter has struggled with his whole time at Brighton. So low here, pushed up a little bit here, but then last season really struggling on the chance creation front. So Graham Potter is a manager who is able to get the ball moving through the thirds, get it to the final thirds, but there are some questions about his team's ability to finish, and that may sound similar to another manager who has recently departed at Chelsea. But before we get to that, let's just take a little bit of a look at what Graham Potter is doing on the field at Brighton. If you were expecting me to tell you exactly what Graham Potter's Brighton looked like, then you're going to be disappointed. And the reason for that is that Graham Potter is one of the most flexible managers in world football. So there is no one way that Brighton play. So this season we've seen them play in this 3-4-3 or 3-box-3 as it's called, because you've got a box here in the midfield area. We've also seen them play with 2 strikers like this, so more in a 3-5-2. We've also seen them play a lot in a 4-2-3-1 as well. So lots of different formations. There are other formations that he uses as well. But Graham Potter isn't just a manager who takes a formation and switches it up to try and see if he can get something different out of his team. Actually, he's a manager who sees each phase of play as an opportunity to problem solve so that he can get his teams moving the ball through the first 2 thirds and into the final third and then attempt to score. So let me just give you a couple of illustrations of how this might work. So let's throw on Everton. So this is Everton last season. They played in a 4-4-2 mid-block against Brighton, and the reason why they did this was that they were able to force Brighton into certain areas where they could then spring pressing traps. Now, we've got a 4-4-2 here. Brighton were playing in a 3-box-3, as we've already said, and the problem is that when the ball was being built up from the back, Brighton would play it to one of their outside centre-backs, and because Everton were in a mid-block, they're just allowing Brighton time and space on the ball in this sort of area. When this outside centre-back was pushing forward, this would then trigger a press. So what we would see is the striker here would do a curved run here, get into this situation. This player would push forward onto the ball carrier here. The fullback would push forward, and then everyone is now matching up to a player, and suddenly you're in a lot of trouble. Now, Graham Potter sees that as a problem to be solved, and the way that he solves it is actually by taking one of his centre-backs out and pushing them into the midfield. So he's now got a back 4, and he can start solving some of these problems in build-ups. So let's have a look at what that looks like. So now, when the outside centre-back gets the ball, the goalkeeper can now push in here anyway, so you've pretty much still got a situational back 3. But when he pushes out with the ball, when this press comes in from the striker to try and get this pressing trap in here, everyone starts pushing up like this. You now have a situation where you have the extra man in midfield, and so what Brighton can do is that they can have one of their midfielders here dropping out of the way, this midfielder coming across, and now you've just generated space. So this is a situation where Graham Potter seeing what's happening, he changes his formation because it allows him to solve a problem, move the ball down the pitch more comfortably. Another example of problem solving came from when Graham Potter played against Marcelo Bielsa last season. Now, as we know, Marcelo Bielsa uses a man-to-man marking system with just a couple of tweaks. So you have 2 players at the back guarding the 1, and that means that there's a player up front who is covering 2 players. Now, At that time, Brighton were playing a back three, and that meant that Rafinha, which is Leeds' most dangerous player, was pushing up on the outside centre-back here, so was able to get isolated against this player all the time, and also is pretty close to goal. Now, Graham Potter didn't want Rafinha to be near the goal, and because he knew that Leeds used a man-marking system, he knew that if he could get the player that Rafinha was man-marking further away from the goal, it would mean that he was in less dangerous positions most of the time. So he switches to a back four. The striker is now covering these two, Rafinha is now covering the fullback here, and everything else stays pretty much the same. The issue now is that because Rafinha is following this player, if he pushes his fullback down the line, Rafinha has to drop with him. So in this situation now, when Brighton have the ball, if the ball is turned over, Rafinha was once at this sort of distance to goal, now he's this distance to goal. So just a simple tweak, a problem solved, and he's moved Rafinha all the way away from a dangerous space. So with Graham Potter, then you get a manager who is super flexible. He can move from a back three to a back four if he wants. He can use a single pivot if he wants to solve those problems in build-up, or he can use a double pivot, and then further forward we can see maybe even two strikers, one striker. Every time he is going through a phase of play, he has the opportunity to change the system in order to solve those problems. So because of this ability to solve problems, Graham Potter can have the ball moved down the field, build-up works really well, progression works really well, and get the ball into the final third and try and work chances from there. But another area of flexibility that we do need to talk about is Graham Potter's ability to get his players playing in different positions. So I want to just use the example of Alexis Mac Allister. So in the board in front of me, we've got all the minutes that Alexis Mac Allister played, 4,000 minutes here since he joined in 2019-20. And as you can see, he plays everywhere. So as you can see, he's played most of his time either as a central midfielder in an attacking situation, so one of the two attacking twos in that box, or in the centre of midfield, so one of the deeper twos as well. Actually, this season we've seen Alexis Mac Allister drop into a single pivot position. 25% of his minutes have come from there as well. He's now playing in a deeper position. He's also played as a striker. He's also played in wide areas as well. And this is something that Graham Potter really likes too. He has the ability to take players, coach them into different positions, and that again just gives him more flexibility. So that's another thing to keep an eye out for. So what will Graham Potter look like at Chelsea? That's the question on everyone's lips. And I want to begin by saying I actually think that the differences between Thomas Tuchel and Graham Potter actually may be less than people might think. So again, I've got another viz in front of me, this again from Mark Carey. This shows play styles. It compares the way that teams are in terms of their direct attacking speed. So the faster the team is in attack, the higher they're going to be on the x-axis. And then on the y-axis, we've got passes per sequence. So the teams who are going to be doing longer build-up will probably have longer passing sequences. And it's really interesting just comparing Brighton and Chelsea here, because you can see on the x-axis here, you've got Brighton and Chelsea sort of attacking at the same sorts of speed. And then in terms of the passes per sequence, Chelsea have about a pass per sequence more than Brighton. So they are having maybe slightly more laborious or longer passing sequences in their build-up. But in terms of the play style, lots of similarities actually between the way that Graham Potter is moving his team down the field and the way that Thomas Tuchel was moving his team down the field. And the similarities don't end there. So in the board in front of me then, I've got the Chelsea setup as they were most likely to appear under Thomas Tuchel. As you can see, this is a formation that we've seen Graham Potter play a lot. This is the 3-box-3 formation. Here's your box in midfield. And that's a formation that Graham Potter is very familiar with. Now, obviously, he has got a much higher caliber of player to actually get stuff out of in terms of the Chelsea team. And then if you look on the side here, we've got all of these elite players, so that if you have to lose a player in one position, you've got a really elite backup to fill them in there. So Graham Potter is going to enjoy having this higher caliber of player at his disposal. Now, Thomas Tuchel didn't really tweak his formation that much, but that doesn't mean to say that he wasn't doing the same sorts of problem-solving things that Graham Potter was doing. So one example of that may be the fact that we've seen Loftus-Cheek, for example, played as a wing-back. Reece James dropped in as an outside centre-back. Now, the reason that they did this was that in certain phases of play, when Chelsea had possession, you could push Loftus-Cheek right up the field here into the forward line, and Reece James could come across, fill in as the wing-back, and then you've got a situational back four here. So we are seeing those same sorts of problem-solving things from Thomas Tuchel in order to be able to build the ball up through the thirds into the final third. But the big question for me about Potter at Chelsea is how much flexibility will we see? It's all well and good being a flexible manager when you're being reactive and you're coming up against teams who are better than you and you have lots more problems to solve. But with Chelsea, it's not going to be about being reactive, it's going to be about being proactive. And part of the problem for Thomas Tuchel was that he wasn't getting enough wins. He was having those problems, particularly in terms of the final third, chance creation, scoring goals. So the big question with Graham Potter will be, how much flexibility will we see? Will we see him just start off with this 3-box-4 formation? Will we see him introducing back 4 formations in the future? Or will it simply be the case that he will start with this formation that the team know, and they'll work with that as the base and then see where they end up from there? And the most important question is, will Graham Potter fix those final third problems that Chelsea have been having under Thomas Tuchel and, more importantly, Brighton have been having under him? So Graham Potter to Chelsea is really fascinating. It's taking a manager from one context and putting him in another context, and we don't really have any experience of this happening before. So it'll be really fascinating to see, and I'm interested to see what you guys think. So if you have any thoughts on this, why not include them in the comments below?
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic brings you the best sports journalism in the world in a personalised experience, connecting you with the stories and teams that you care about the most. There's coverage of 13 sports, plus direct access to world-class journalists through live Q&As, discussions and podcasts. Not to mention, it's all ad-free. And you can try it now for free for 30 days by clicking the link in the description.